55 years old. That is how long this gun has been mounted on American warships, designed when Nixon was in the White House, when the Soviet Union still existed, when a pocket calculator cost more than a car. 55 years. And 3 weeks ago, it stopped an Iranian vessel dead in the Strait of Hormuz in under 90 seconds of fire. 3 rounds. 90 seconds. One ship that will never move under its own power again. The Pentagon has spent the last 3 decades chasing the future. Railguns that fire projectiles at 7 times the speed of sound. Laser systems that cost $400 million per installation. Hypersonic missiles that compress a 1,000-mile strike into 11 minutes. Congress has appropriated, by conservative estimate, tens of billions of dollars on directed energy weapons alone. Programs that have been canceled, restarted, underfunded, overpromised, and quietly shelved. Billions of dollars. And the weapon that actually settled a confrontation in the most contested maritime choke point on the planet was engineered before the microprocessor existed as a commercial product. And here is the part that should make every defense contractor uncomfortable. The Harpoon anti-ship missile, the standard alternative, costs approximately $1,400,000 per round. The SM-6, used for longer-range surface engagements, runs several million per shot. The 127mm shell that stopped the Iranian vessel costs, depending on variant, somewhere between $800 and a few $1,000s. The United States Navy ended a potential international incident for less than the price of a used Honda Civic. 3 shots. The cost of a weekend in a decent hotel multiplied by 3. But the paradox cuts deeper than money. We spent 30 years being told that naval gunfire was obsolete, that missiles had made the big gun warship a museum piece, that the future belonged to standoff weapons launched from beyond the horizon, that a navy which still relied on cannons was a navy thinking in the wrong century. That argument was not wrong. It was incomplete. Because on the day it mattered, in the strait where 30% of the world's seaborne oil passes through a gap 21 miles wide, the answer was not a missile. It was a gun that Richard Nixon's Navy would have recognized immediately. The most sophisticated naval force in human history just won a confrontation with a weapon your grandfather could have operated. That is not a coincidence. That is a lesson. The footage ran on every platform within hours. 16 seconds, shaky stabilization, the gray hull of a destroyer in the middle distance, and 3 distinct flashes from the bow. Then a cut. Then nothing. 17 million views in under a day. Comments full of people who had never heard of the Mk-45 suddenly explaining naval warfare to each other with complete confidence. Here is what those 16 seconds do not show you. They do not show the firing angle, which tells you everything about where the rounds were aimed and why. They do not show the distance. And distance in naval gunnery is the entire story, because 15 nautical miles and 3 nautical miles are not the same tactical situation in any sense that matters. They do not show what happened to the Iranian vessel in the minutes after the clip ends. And they absolutely do not show the 40-minute sequence of events that preceded the first shot. The radio warnings, the course corrections that did not happen, the decision chain that ends with a fire control officer pressing a trigger. A 15-second clip of a naval engagement is like a 15-second clip of a surgery. You see the blade. You do not see the diagnosis, the preparation, the 10 people in the room doing invisible work, or the reason the patient is on the table at all. The violence is the least interesting part of what actually happened in the Strait of Hormuz. And that is precisely what this breakdown is going to fix. Every major outlet asked the same question in the same way. Why did the destroyer open fire? None of them asked the question that actually matters. Why did it open fire with the gun? There were missiles on that ship. There are always missiles on an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. A Harpoon Block II travels at just under the speed of sound, carries a 220-kilogram warhead, and would have turned that Iranian vessel into a debris field in approximately 90 seconds of flight time. So why didn't they use it? The answer has 3 layers, and the news cycle got none of them. The first layer is cost, which we already touched on. But cost here is not just arithmetic. It is doctrine. Firing $1 million missile at a vessel that you want to stop, not destroy, is the naval equivalent of using a sledgehammer to adjust a watch. The Mk-45 gives a commander something no missile in the American inventory provides: gradation. 1 round is a warning, 2 rounds walking toward the engine room, 3 rounds on target. That is a conversation conducted in steel. A harpoon is not a conversation. It is a termination. The second layer is politics. A missile strike on an Iranian naval vessel in the Strait of Hormuz triggers a completely different set of international and congressional responses than an artillery engagement that disables without sinking. The gun leaves the ship afloat. It leaves options open. It leaves the other side a way to de-escalate without announcing a defeat. The third layer is what nobody writes about. The gun was the precise tool for the precise problem. And precision, not firepower, is what prevents a regional incident from becoming a regional war. Forget the video, look at the numbers, and let the numbers build the picture. 127 millimeters. That is the diameter of the bore, roughly the width of a large man's fist. The barrel that round travels through is 54 calibers long, which means 6.8 meters of steel, accelerating the projectile from rest to 800 meters per second in a fraction of a second. The forces involved are not intuitive. The propellant charge generates chamber pressures exceeding 300 megapascals, about 3,000 times the pressure in a standard car tire, and it does this 16 to 20 times per minute, reliably, in salt air, in 40-degree heat, in sea states that would make most people incapable of standing upright. 31 kilograms per round, 16 rounds per minute at minimum rate of fire. That is 496 kilograms of steel and explosive delivered to a target area every 60 seconds. At maximum rate, over 500 kilograms. The barrel does not care about the weather forecast. It does not require a satellite link. It does not have a guidance chip that can be spoofed by a $20 electronic countermeasure bought online. The effective range on a standard high-explosive round is 24 kilometers, with an extended range projectile that stretches further. The Iranian vessel, based on available reporting, was well inside that envelope, which means the fire control system was not working at the edge of its capability. It was working in the middle of its comfort zone, the way a surgeon operates better when the patient is positioned correctly. The Mk-45 was not straining to reach that target. It was barely trying. 3 rounds. Not 10, not 30, 3. That number is not luck, and it is not marksmanship folklore. It is engineering, and understanding it requires knowing something about what a diesel propulsion plant actually looks like from the outside of the hull. The Iranian vessel, based on analyst assessments, runs on a propulsion configuration where the engine room occupies a predictable section of the stern, low centerline, below the main deck, protected by hull plating that is substantial enough to stop small arms and fragmentation, but not a 31-kilogram shell arriving at terminal velocity. The first round that penetrates that zone does not need to destroy the engine. It needs to destroy the conditions under which the engine can operate: fuel lines, cooling systems, the electrical infrastructure that modern diesel propulsion cannot function without. Carl Schuster, a retired U.S. Navy captain and Pacific Command analyst, has stated publicly that a Touska-type diesel configuration requires a minimum of 2 precise hits to that compartment to guarantee propulsion loss. Not hull damage, not fires on deck. Loss of propulsion specifically. Targeting the stern below the waterline also communicates something the crew understands immediately and completely. The ship is not being sunk. The ship is being told to stop in a language that requires no translation, no radio frequency, no interpreter. 3 rounds into the engine room is a sentence with a period at the end. The hull stays intact. The crew stays alive. The message arrives at 800 meters per second. The shell that stopped the Iranian vessel was almost certainly a standard high-explosive point detonating round. In the taxonomy of what the Mk-45 can actually fire, that is the bottom shelf, the oldest, cheapest, least technically sophisticated option in the magazine, which means the gun was not even operating near the ceiling of its capability. It was using the naval equivalent of a factory default setting. That ceiling is worth understanding because it reframes the entire conversation about whether artillery belongs on a modern warship. The Excalibur N5 is a GPS, an inertial navigation guided projectile, same 127mm caliber, that extends effective range to approximately 48 kilometers and delivers a circular error probable, the radius within which 50% of rounds land, of under 5 meters. 5 meters. From a ship moving through open water, firing at a target the GPS coordinates of which were acquired by a satellite pass hours earlier. That is not artillery in any historical sense of the word. That is a guided munition that happens to be fired from a barrel rather than launched from a tube. Between the basic fuse and the Excalibur sits a family of programmable rounds. The multi-service standard rounds with proximity fuse options, variable delay settings, air burst capability, the same barrel, the same mount, the same 55-year-old mechanical architecture fires all of them interchangeably. This is not one weapon. This is a platform that accepts an entire spectrum of lethality, from warning shot to precision strike, calibrated by the choice of what you load into the magazine. The Iranians were stopped by the cheapest option. That fact alone should end several ongoing procurement debates. April 18th, 1988. The same water, roughly the same geography, a different generation of sailors who had never heard the phrase network-centric warfare and would not have cared if they had. The frigate Samuel B. Roberts hit an Iranian mine in the central Persian Gulf on April 14th. The explosion broke the ship's keel, injured 10 sailors, and nearly sank a vessel that had done nothing except exist in international waters. 4 days later, the United States Navy conducted Operation Praying Mantis, the largest surface engagement American forces had fought since the Second World War. Destroyers and frigates moved against Iranian oil platforms being used as military staging posts. Iranian fast attack boats sortied to respond. What followed was settled, in significant part, by naval gunfire. The same caliber family, the same tactical logic, the same geometry of a shell moving faster than sound toward a hull that cannot maneuver quickly enough to matter. 2 Iranian vessels were sunk. One was damaged severely enough to be abandoned by its crew. The platforms were destroyed. The engagement lasted hours and ended Iranian offensive naval operations in the Gulf for years. 38 years separate Praying Mantis from the Hormuz incident. In those 38 years, the Navy acquired Aegis, satellite navigation, over-the-horizon targeting, drone reconnaissance, and directed energy prototypes. The threat changed, the technology changed, the geography did not change, the strategic logic did not change, and the weapon that closed the engagement did not fundamentally change either. 38 years of defense innovation, and the period at the end of the sentence is still a 127mm shell. So here is the conclusion that writes itself, the one that half the defense commentators reached within 48 hours of the footage going viral. Old technology wins. Simple beats complex. The Navy wasted decades chasing expensive solutions to problems that a gun from 1971 already solved. Cancel the railgun program. Redirect the laser funding. Put the money into shells and barrels and the sailors who operate them. Clean narrative. Satisfying arc. Almost entirely wrong. The Mk-45 fired those 3 rounds from inside 15 nautical miles of the target. 15 miles is not a safe distance in a contested strait. 15 miles is inside the engagement envelope of the Iranian anti-ship missiles that were almost certainly on vessels in the area. The destroyer was at 15 miles because it had already survived getting to 15 miles, which required Aegis radar tracking every airborne object within 300 kilometers, which required satellite reconnaissance that identified the Iranian vessel's course and intent hours before the confrontation, which required air superiority overhead that made Iranian aviation a non-factor, which required electronic warfare systems suppressing targeting emissions from hostile platforms. The gun fired for 90 seconds. The operation enabling those 90 seconds ran for hours, possibly days, involving systems that cost orders of magnitude more than the Mk-45 and will never appear in a 16-second clip. Saying the old gun won this engagement is like watching the final 30 seconds of a chess match and concluding that the winning move was simple. The move was simple. Everything that made the move possible was not. The video shows the period. It does not show the sentence. Before the next part, a full stop. Not a disclaimer buried in the description. A genuine accounting of what this breakdown does not actually know. The official U.S. Navy after-action report has not been released in complete form. What exists publicly is a combination of Pentagon statements, regional press reporting, and assessments from retired analysts who are working from the same incomplete information the rest of us have. The precise number of rounds fired is not confirmed in any primary source this analysis has accessed. 3 is the figure that appears most consistently across credible reporting. It may be 3 rounds that hit critical systems, with additional rounds fired and missed, or fired as warning shots before the targeting solution was finalized. Those are meaningfully different scenarios that the current public record cannot distinguish between. The identification of the vessel's propulsion system as a Touska-type configuration is an analyst assessment, not a confirmed engineering specification from Iranian naval documentation. Carl Schuster's 2-hit threshold for propulsion kill is the judgment of an experienced officer, not a manufacturer's test result. It is the best available public estimate. It is not a controlled experiment. The cost figures cited for Harpoon and SM-6 are derived from publicly available procurement data and congressional budget documents, which reflect acquisition cost, not marginal cost per engagement, and not the full lifecycle economics of maintaining those systems at readiness. This matters because the temptation with a clean narrative, old gun beats expensive missile, 3 shots, done, is to let the cleanness substitute for the complexity. The incident probably happened roughly as described here, probably is doing real work in that sentence, and you should hold it there. The Navy is not retiring the Mk-45. It is doing the opposite. The Mod 4 upgrade, the current production standard, extends the barrel from 54 calibers to 62 calibers, which increases muzzle velocity, which increases range and terminal energy. The fire control integration with Aegis has been deepened to the point where the gun can receive targeting solutions from the ship's combat management system without manual input at the mount. The magazine handling system has been redesigned to reduce the crew requirement for sustained fire. Every one of these changes points in the same direction. The Navy is not tolerating the Mk-45 as legacy equipment it hasn't gotten around to replacing. It is actively investing in making it more capable, more autonomous, and more integrated with the most sophisticated naval combat architecture on the planet. Alongside this, the Excalibur N5 program continues to receive funding. Extended-range guided projectiles that turn the Mk-45 into a precision strike system at 40-plus kilometers are not a research curiosity. They are a procurement line item that survives budget cycles, which in the Pentagon's ecosystem is the most reliable signal of institutional commitment that exists. The hypersonic programs continue in parallel. The laser development continues. None of that spending is being canceled because a gun worked in the Strait of Hormuz. The lesson the Navy is drawing is not either or. It is that the full spectrum of violence, from a single warning round to a hypersonic strike from 400 kilometers, needs to be available simultaneously on the same hull, commanded by the same officer. The Hormuz incident did not vindicate the past. It clarified what the future actually requires. 30 years of conference panels, procurement hearings, and think tank white papers delivered the same verdict in different fonts. The era of naval gunfire was over. Missiles had range. Missiles had precision. Missiles did not require a ship to close within 15 miles of a target to be effective. The gun was a holdover, maintained out of institutional inertia and the comfort of tradition, destined for the museum alongside the battleship and the torpedo boat. That argument was made by serious people with serious credentials, and it was not stupid. It was just incomplete in a way that only becomes visible when the shooting starts. What the Hormuz incident revealed is not that missiles are wrong and guns are right. It revealed that the logic of warfare does not progress in straight lines. New capabilities do not replace old ones. They stack on top of them, and the stack becomes the actual weapon. A destroyer in 2025 is not a gun platform or a missile platform. It is a decision platform, and the quality of its decisions is measured by the granularity of options available to the officer making them. The gun provides options that nothing else in the magazine replicates: sublethal, graduated, cheap enough to use without a congressional notification, fast enough to matter in 90 seconds. The future of naval warfare arrived decades ago. Built glass cockpits and phased array radars and network targeting systems around itself, and then discovered it still needed the thing it had been carrying since 1971. Not because the future failed, because the future was smart enough to keep it. The most advanced warship in human history just proved that the most important technology is knowing which one to use. The next logical question, the one this breakdown has been building toward without stating directly, is what happens when the shell itself becomes the smart weapon. Not the missile, not the drone, the shell. The Excalibur N5 is a 127mm projectile with a GPS receiver, an inertial measurement unit, and a set of canard fins that adjust trajectory mid-flight. It fits in the same magazine as the basic high-explosive round that stopped the Iranian vessel. It is fired from the same barrel, by the same crew, through the same fire control system, and it lands within 5 meters of a designated coordinate at 48 kilometers distance from a moving platform, in conditions where a human spotter cannot see the target at all. That is not an incremental improvement on the round used in the Strait of Hormuz. That is a categorically different capability wearing the same clothes. What that means for coastal operations, for the specific problem of engaging fortified positions, fast-moving littoral targets, and shore infrastructure without committing a cruise missile that costs 50 times more and cannot be recalled once fired, is a conversation the Navy is having internally right now, with real urgency, because the answer changes the entire calculus of how you fight a peer adversary in confined coastal waters. The gun that stopped a ship with 3 cheap rounds is the same platform that can place a guided projectile through a specific window at the distance from here to the horizon. That continuity, same mount, same barrel, 55 years of institutional knowledge, radically expanded ceiling, is not nostalgia. It is the most honest picture of how military technology actually evolves. Subscribe if that next conversation is one you want to be inside of, rather than reading about after the fact.